Well, good morning once again. I just want to share some things with you just to encourage you just for a few minutes before we continue to worship God in our giving. You know, we were designed in the image and likeness of our God. We were designed for success. But let me tell you something about human nature. Human nature is just the opposite. It is human nature to always choose the path of least resistance. And let me just explain that for you just a little bit. When it comes to your relationship with God, sometimes the most obvious path that you're going to see is the path that God has laid out for you. But that path that God has laid out for you is going to require you to stretch and going to require you to go into places that you probably don't want to go into. But it's all God's perfect plan for you. Because see, if you allow it just to human nature, just doing things what you're comfortable with, you're going to always choose the path of least resistance. You're going to have to press for the will of God. The will of God, church, is more of a privilege than it is a price. What an awesome privilege we have as the children of God to partner with God Almighty for His increase in the earth. But that process that God has laid out for you is not a plan that is going to take you down the path without conflict. The will of God for your life, for your family, for our generation, and for the nations of the world, the will of God is guaranteed, but it's not automatic. At some time in your life, you're going to have to decide if I'm willing to do the will of God. If I'm willing to lay aside all the things that are holding me in my place of stagnation and keeping me from breaking out of the barriers that the world has set for me and that the devil has set up in my life, at some point, we're going to have to decide. But until we make that decision, you've already chose to decide to take the path of least resistance. I want to encourage you. Embrace the privilege that God has afforded to us to do His will. The privilege that God has given us. It's worth it. I want to encourage you today. Do what it takes to become the best that God has for your life. Become what God has for your family and for your generation. I know that you want to face giants. I know you want to face things that you probably didn't imagine that you'd face. But I want to just close with this last bit of encouragement. Can you imagine what it might have been like for David? A young boy being anointed of God to lead his generation. I promise you, David never considered the price, but he valued the privilege. David never thought about what it would cost him, but he always considered the privilege he had to be chosen by God. Now we can isolate it to just his brothers, but it's more than that, church. And I want to tell you the same thing. Out of all of the people that God could have chosen, He chose you. Think of all of your family members. Think of everybody that you've met in your lifetime. And then think of the fact that God chose you. It's a privilege. And I can imagine when David set out to do the will of God, he encountered many things that he had no plans for. He didn't plan on killing a bear. He didn't plan on facing a lion. And he probably didn't even plan on facing Goliath. But David considered not the price, but the awesome privilege he had to be chosen by God to serve his generation.